I took my son's wife's phone for repair. The technician whispered, "Ma'am, you need to see this," and just a week later. I was halfway down the hallway with the broom when Marcia's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "What are you doing? Are you sweeping or spreading the dirt? God, you make this whole place filthier every time you touch something." Her heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor as she marched toward me. Her eyes narrowed, her lips drawn into that familiar sneer she reserved just for me. "And that smell, my God. Old people should come with a warning label. You are staining this house with your existence." I gripped the broom a little tighter, trying to steady the tremor in my fingers. I had been sweeping for nearly half an hour, and my back felt like someone had set a hot iron between my shoulder blades, but Marcia did not care about the effort. She only cared that I was slow. She only cared that I was still breathing. "I swear," she said, throwing her hands dramatically into the air, "if you die sooner, I will light incense every day from gratitude alone." She turned her head, making sure I heard the next part clearly. "Some people do not know when their time is up. They just hang around like ghosts with nowhere else to go." I bent to sweep under the coffee table, hoping that if I kept my head down, she might lose interest. Instead, she pulled out her phone and lifted it high. The screen glowed inches from my face. "Look at this," she said to no one, and everyone at once. "The old hag is learning basic chores. I should live stream this. Maybe it will give people a good laugh." Her voice rose in a mocking sing-song. "Say hi to TikTok, Lorraine." Her thumb tapped the screen. The little chime of a live feed beginning echoed against my ribs like humiliation made audible. "Watch," she told her viewers. "The ancient relic tries to sweep like a human." My ears burned. My hands shook harder. I kept my eyes on the floor. Maybe if I stayed quiet enough, she would get bored. But fate has a way of choosing the worst possible moment to reveal how fragile hope can be. As I dragged the broom across the floor, the wooden handle brushed against the edge of the coffee table, knocking the remote control to the ground. It clattered on the floorboards, a tiny sound. Insignificant, but in this house, even a falling feather felt like a catastrophe. Marcia froze. Her eyes widened, and then the storm broke. "You useless, clumsy corpse!" she screamed, and before I could raise my hands, her phone flew from her fingers. It hit the side of my head with a crack so sharp it felt like lightning had struck me. I stumbled back into the wall, grabbing for balance as something warm trickled down my temple. The impact shattered the screen of her phone instantly. I touched my forehead. My fingers came away red. Behind her, Evan stood with his arms crossed, watching his wife's tantrum, as if she were correcting a dog, not assaulting his mother. His face held nothing. No shock, no concern, no instinct to defend me. Only cold detachment. Marcia snatched the broken phone from the floor, thrust it into my hands, and hissed, "Look what you did. You broke my phone, you miserable burden." I did not mean. "You never mean anything. You just exist, and that is problem enough." She jabbed a finger into my shoulder. "You will fix this. Do you hear me? You will take this phone to the repair shop, and you will pay for it out of your own pocket." Evan finally spoke, his tone flat and practical, as if we were discussing groceries. "Mom, you get a pension. Use that. Marcia should not have to pay for your mistakes." Mistakes. That was what my bruised skin and trembling hands meant to him. Marcia pushed the phone harder into my hands. "Take this thing and go, right now, before you embarrass me further. And wipe your forehead before you leave. I do not want neighbors thinking I beat you." Her voice dipped to a whisper. "Even though you deserve it." I swallowed the taste of metal rising in my mouth and forced my feet toward the door. I did not want to give her the satisfaction of watching me cry. But the moment I stepped onto the porch, the pain throbbed across my temple and my vision blurred for a moment. I steadied myself against the railing, clutching the broken phone like a lifeline I never asked for. I walked slowly down the driveway, my body aching from the blow, my spirit bruised from the words. And somewhere around that moment, while I held that cracked phone with its spiderweb screen, I felt something inside me shift, a quiet spark. A sense that the truth, whatever it was, would not stay hidden much longer. If you feel justice deserves celebration, Smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. I wiped my forehead, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the phone repair shop without knowing that this simple errand, forced on me through humiliation and pain, was the very thing that would uncover everything they had been hiding. The video files, the recordings, the plan, the danger, and it all began with a broken phone and a whispered warning I had not yet heard. People assume cruelty happens suddenly, like a storm that bursts out of a clear sky, but with my son Evan, it did not begin with shouting or neglect. It began with tiny seeds of bitterness planted by his own father, a man I once loved deeply, a man whose temper was a fuse always waiting for a spark. Evan was still a little boy when his father started whispering poison into his ears. I would return from long hospital shifts, my scrubs still carrying the smell of antiseptic, and I would hear him say things like, "Your mother is always out helping strangers. She never chooses us." He said it with a half smile, as though it were a joke, but Evan was too young to understand sarcasm. Children take everything literally, especially words spoken by the person they want most to admire. What I never understood until much later was that Evan did not turn cold overnight. He had been trained to believe affection was something earned, not given, and that loyalty belonged only to those who fed his ego. Marcia merely completed what his father had begun teaching him, that love is a transaction, and that a mother who sets boundaries is an enemy. So Evan grew up believing that every time I wrapped gauze around a wounded child, every time I stayed late to stabilize an accident victim, every time I walked into our home tired but grateful just to be with him, I had chosen someone else over my own family. He never remembered the nights I stayed up nursing him through fevers, or the years I worked double shifts so he could attend the science camp he begged for. What stuck in his mind were the moments twisted by his father's resentment, the resentment of a man who felt overshadowed by a wife who refused to break beneath responsibility. The worst part is Evan forgot the truth of the day I actually saved his life. He had been 8 years old, riding his bike near the end of our street, when a speeding car whipped around the corner. I saw it before he did. I remember the scream tearing out of my chest as I sprinted toward him, grabbing the handlebars and yanking him backward just as the car scraped the curb where he had stood a second before. He was safe, shaken, but safe. But in front of his friends, I scolded him for ignoring the rules about the street. It came out too harsh, fueled by fear. What stuck in his mind was not that I had saved him, but that I had embarrassed him. He retold that version so many times he erased the real one. Even now, decades later, if he were asked about that day, he would remember only my raised voice, not my shaking hands holding him afterward. Years passed, and as I continued working as a nurse, the long hours deepened his belief that he had been an afterthought. He saw the uniform, the late nights, the exhaustion, and he filled in the rest with the story his father had crafted. That his mother loved the world more than her own child. Then one day, Marcia walked into his life. From the beginning, I sensed she carried sharpness behind her smile. She had a way of speaking that turned insecurity into accusation, envy into contempt. And she quickly realized Evan was hungry for validation she could weaponize. She would sit at the dining table, swirling her straw in a glass of soda, and casually say things like, "It is no wonder you struggled for so long, Evan. With a mother that broke, how could you ever get ahead?" Or, "If your mother had planned better, maybe you would have had a better childhood." Every sentence was a drop of acid. But the day she discovered I had a modest life insurance policy was the day her tone sharpened into pure calculation. "She is old," Marcia said softly, rubbing Evan's shoulder. "And when old people pass, it is natural. It could give us a chance to finally breathe, maybe even afford the life we deserve." She said it with such false tenderness that Evan mistook manipulation for loyalty. But Marcia's hatred for me came from even pettier places so small and selfish they almost defied reason. She asked me once, shortly after marrying Evan, to loan her money to upgrade her SUV. She wanted the latest model, the one her coworkers drove. When I refused because I could barely cover my own bills, her face hardened into something cold, something calculating. She never forgave me for saying no to that car. Later, she asked me to sign my name on a set of documents, transferring partial ownership of my house to Evan, for convenience. When I refused again, her resentment bloomed into an open wound. "You are selfish," she hissed, "hoarding things you will not even live long enough to use." But the moment that sealed her hatred forever was shockingly small. Evan had gotten into trouble with the neighbors throwing rocks that cracked a window. I made him march over and apologize. I refused to sweep it under the rug. Marcia was furious. "You made him lose face," she told me. "A mother protects her son. You humiliated him." I corrected her gently. "A parent teaches responsibility." She corrected me sharply. "No, a parent takes their child's side. Always." From then on, she told Evan daily that I was the obstacle to his success, to his freedom, to his happiness. She told him the house should have been his already. She told him I was draining the money he could use more wisely. She told him my eventual death was simply nature running its course. Day after day, drip by drip, she fed him poison until the boy I raised, the boy I rocked to sleep, the boy I comforted through nightmares, looked at me not with love, but with the hollow eyes of someone who believed he had outgrown compassion. And when you hear enough lies whispered in the dark, you start mistaking them for truth. I did not lose my son in one dramatic moment. I lost him slowly, year by year, until one morning I woke up and realized he did not see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as the burden Marcia had taught him I was, and that was the foundation beneath the cruelty that followed. When Marcia's phone struck my forehead earlier that morning, the shock had made my vision blur, but not nearly as much as the humiliation. I remember touching the tender spot just above my eyebrow as I walked into the small electronics repair shop. The bruise was already rising. The technician behind the counter, tall, soft-spoken, with a quiet steadiness in his posture, looked up when I entered. "Morning, ma'am," he said gently. "Rough day?" I tried to smile. Something like that. His name tag read Diego Mercer, and when he took the cracked phone from my trembling hands, he handled it with a mix of professionalism and concern I had not felt from my own family in years. "Screen's shattered pretty badly," he murmured. "I'll need to run a full diagnostic." I nodded and sat on the small waiting bench. My hands would not stop shaking. It was not just the bruise. It was the memory of Evan quietly saying, "Mom, you broke her phone, you fix it." As if the welt forming on my head were an inconvenience he had no interest in acknowledging. After 20 minutes, Diego called from the back room. "Ma'am, I need you to step inside for a moment." His tone was different, lower, heavier. My stomach tightened. I walked into the repair room where cables, tools, and open device shells covered the workspace. Diego stood beside Marcia's phone with the screen already removed, the motherboard exposed like an open wound. He did not look at me at first. "Mrs. Whitcomb, when I accessed the phone's storage, I found something unusual." My heart fluttered. "Unusual how?" He picked up the phone and tapped on a hidden folder I would never have known existed if I lived another 100 years. "There's a covert camera app installed," he said quietly. "Not a regular one. This is the kind used for surveillance." I felt my knees weaken. What? What does that mean?" "It means the phone was recording video automatically." He inhaled slowly. "And the videos are of you, ma'am." For a moment, the room tilted. "I do not understand." He opened the first clip. It was my bedroom, my private, vulnerable space. And there I was sleeping, curled toward the wall, unaware of the small blinking light hidden behind the bookshelf that Marcia once insisted on helping me rearrange. I had thought she was being generous that day. Diego clicked another video. This one was in the hallway, capturing the staircase. My staircase. The one Marcia always told me to take slowly because you shake like a leaf. I reached for the chair beside me before my legs gave out. "Keep watching," Diego said softly, as though he wished he did not have to say it at all. The next recording showed Evan in the kitchen, leaning on the counter, speaking in a low voice that made my skin go cold. If she slips on those stairs, her neck will not hold. The insurance would clear fast. I felt my breath vanish. Diego did not pause. Marcia's voice joined the next clip, light and casual, like she was planning a shopping list instead of murder. She does not even need to die instantly, Marcia said. Just get her unconscious. No resuscitation means nature takes care of the rest. Her laughter echoed through the tiny speakers. I clamped a hand over my mouth as a sob ripped through my chest. Diego closed the file, letting the silence settle between us until it became unbearable. "Ma'am," he swallowed. That was not all. I looked up at him, my eyes burning. "There are emails," he continued. "Drafts and sent messages. I checked the metadata. These were sent from this phone." He opened a folder labeled F. Inside were 5 messages. He highlighted one. It read, "Subject, procedure. Dr. Fowler. If complications occur, please do not perform resuscitation. Payment will be doubled. M. Whitcomb." My vision tunneled. Dr. Fowler. I knew that name. He was the doctor Marcia insisted I start seeing 6 months ago when she said my old heart needed better monitoring. I trusted her suggestion because she had said it would give her peace of mind. Peace of mind. I now realized she meant peace from me. Diego clicked open another email. "We need a date before the renewal deadline. Tell me what needs to happen." The last one was even worse. "Ensure the fall looks natural. She is frail, should not be difficult." I covered my face with both hands, as if darkness could erase what I had seen. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Diego said softly, "I know this is hard, but you need to understand this is evidence, serious evidence." He reached into his drawer and pulled out a small, unmarked black USB stick. "I backed up everything onto this, encrypted it, password protected." I hesitated before taking it, afraid my fingers were too weak, too shaken to hold something so important. "Why?" My voice cracked. "Why are you helping me?" His expression softened with something almost protective. "Because my grandmother raised me," he said. "And if someone tried to hurt her, I would want someone to help her too." His words broke whatever came before them. I wiped the tears from my swollen cheeks. "Thank you," I whispered. "You may have saved my life." Diego shook his head gently. "Ma'am, those videos suggest someone else was planning to take your life. All I did was press play." He placed the phone, still broken, on the table. "You need to leave that house," he said quietly. "Immediately." I nodded, gripping the USB like it was the last lifeline I had in this world. I did not know then that this small drive, no bigger than my thumb, would uncover every lie, every betrayal, every murderous intention Evan and Marcia had tried so carefully to hide. But standing in that repair shop, trembling beneath the weight of my son's voice planning my death, one truth rang louder than the rest. I had never been safe in their home. And now, finally, I had the proof. By the time I left the repair shop with Diego's USB hidden in the lining of my purse, the winter air outside felt different, sharper, colder, as if the world itself knew what I now carried. I walked home slowly, the bruise above my eyebrow throbbing with each step, but the real pain pulsed deeper, in a place no medicine could reach. When I stepped inside the house, Marcia was already waiting near the kitchen island, arms crossed, eyes narrow, lips curled in that familiar smirk of hers. "Well?" she snapped. "Did you fix it, or did your arthritic fingers drop it again?" I didn't answer her. Not because I couldn't, because if I opened my mouth, the truth flooding through me might drown us both. She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Useless," she muttered, "a 75-year-old parasite." Evan appeared from the hallway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He didn't look at me. He rarely did anymore. Marcia tugged at his arm, dragging him toward the living room in a rush, like she had something urgent to show him. What happened next, I learned only later through Avery Cross, through recordings, through the USB Diego had handed me, but even before I saw the details, my bones seemed to sense it. The house had gone too quiet, too still, like a breath being held. Inside the living room, Marcia laid out her plan with the precision of someone arranging flowers. She placed a thick envelope on the table. 7,000, she said, tapping it. He'll mark it as a fall, no resuscitation. Cardiac arrest after trauma, clean and simple. Evan hesitated, his fingers twitching. Are you sure Fowler won't talk? 7 grand isn't much for a felony. Marcia smirked. Please. He's drowning in debt, and he hates old patients. He practically encouraged it. There was a silence. Then Evan asked the question that revealed all the rot inside him. Will there be an investigation? No, Marcia replied. Old lady falls down the stairs? Happens every day. Coroner signs it off without blinking. Something inside me cracked as if I could hear those words echoing through the walls, past, present, all colliding. But Marcia wasn't finished. She walked toward the staircase with a bottle of dish soap, shaking it with casual cruelty, as if preparing a prank rather than a killing. This, she said, squirting a thin, almost invisible smear onto the 3rd step, is where it happens. When she comes down for her morning tea, she'll slip, natural as rain. Evan swallowed hard. He looked scared, but he didn't stop her. Just make sure I'm not standing close, he muttered. I don't want to get dragged into it. Marcia laughed. Oh, darling, you're already in it. When she finished, she leaned in and whispered to him, her voice a poisonous sweetness dripping into the air. By this time next week, we'll have the house, the insurance, and a life without her. I didn't hear those words that night, but I felt them. The next morning, fate, or perhaps the inevitable gravity of their intentions, did not wait. I woke early, still shaken from the night before, my shoulders stiff, my mind spinning with Diego's warnings. I needed water to swallow the pain medication Bella had once told me to take in the mornings. When I stepped onto the staircase, my hand automatically reached for the railing, something I had done for years. But the 3rd step was slick, unnaturally slick. My foot shot forward as if pulled by an invisible force. The world tilted, my stomach lurched. The railing slipped from my grip. I fell sideways, hitting each step with a thud that sent lightning through my bones. The final impact knocked the breath from my lungs, leaving me stunned, the ceiling spinning above me. Somewhere in the blur, I heard movement. I lifted my head just enough to see Evan standing 10 feet away, frozen, not running toward me, not calling my name, just staring. Evan, I whispered. He did not answer. He did not move. Only when Marcia rushed from the kitchen, fake panic in her voice, did he blink back to life. Oh my God, she fell, she shrieked, but her eyes held no fear, only impatience. She's alive? She hissed at Evan under her breath. How? I closed my eyes, pretending disorientation, pretending pain was the only thing I understood. But inside, I finally understood everything. All the suspicions, all the coldness, all the swallowed grief. I was not loved, I was not wanted, I was prey. Hours later, when Avery Cross knocked on the door holding her phone, hands shaking, I understood something else entirely. The fall was not the end of their plan. It was the beginning. Avery's outdoor camera had caught everything: Marcia spreading soap, Evan watching, neither lifting a finger when I lay crumpled at the bottom of the stairs. I wasn't imagining their hatred. And now, I could prove it. The first battle had begun, and I was no longer the defenseless old woman they believed me to be. I had lived long enough to know the difference between fear and clarity. Fear is foggy, trembling, uncertain. But clarity, real, cold, diamond-edged clarity that comes only when a woman finally accepts the truth she never wanted to face. And the truth was simple. My son and his wife wanted me dead. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. So I decided that if they were going to try to bury me, they would have to watch me claw my way out of the grave they dug. The morning after my fall, I left the house quietly, before either of them woke up from whatever guiltless sleep they managed to have. My shoulder throbbed, my hip burned, but my mind felt sharper than it had in years. My shoulders screamed with every step, and the bruises along my ribs throbbed each time I breathed, but adrenaline carried me forward. I told Harold I had fallen, and he insisted on taking photos of the injuries before we did anything else. Document everything, he said. Pain can speak louder in a courtroom than any witness. I walked into Harold Benton's law office with my coat pulled tight around me. The receptionist looked up as if she had seen a ghost. "Mrs. Whitcomb? He'll see you immediately." Harold came out of his office before she even finished the sentence. He stared at me, at my bruised temple, my swollen shoulder, the stiffness in my movements, and something darkened in his eyes. "Lorraine," he whispered, almost breathless, "who did this to you?" He was no longer the lanky 12-year-old boy I remembered, the boy who had been mauled by a neighbor's dog until I threw myself between them and carried him, bleeding, all the way to the ER. Now he was a broad-shouldered, confident man in an expensive suit, a man with a courtroom presence that could crush stone. But in that moment, he looked like the child I once saved. "You did not come here for small talk," he said quietly. "Tell me everything." And I did. I told him about the fall, about Evan's empty stare, about Marcia's smile that never touched her eyes. I told him about Diego, the repair shop, the hidden camera, the recordings, the emails, the plan. By the time I finished, Harold's jaw was clenched so hard I thought his molars might crack. "Show me," he said. I handed him the USB Diego had saved. He plugged it into his computer and watched the first video without blinking. Evan's voice filled the room, cold and matter-of-fact, discussing the speed of insurance payouts. Marcia's voice followed, sharp, calculating, dripping venom. "If she goes down the stairs head first, we won't have to wait long. We can say, 'We found her too late.' Make sure she walks alone." Harold stopped the footage and whispered, "You have a homicide conspiracy, and you have documented intent. This is as solid as it gets." He clicked through the emails. There it was, the one to Dr. Fowler. "Just don't revive her. I'll bring the rest of the money in cash." Harold inhaled sharply. This alone could end her freedom, but with everything combined. He sat straighter. "Lorraine, we're not just opening an investigation. We're building a case that will put them away for years." But then he turned serious, leaning forward with a weight in his gaze. "Before we go to the police, I need more. A pattern, proof of ongoing danger, recordings inside the house." My stomach tightened. "You want me to go back?" "I know it's hard," he said gently. "But you're safer than you think. They believe you're weak. They think you're confused. Use that. Let them keep talking. Monsters always brag when they believe no one is listening." He opened a drawer and placed a small device in my hand, no bigger than a thumb. "A sound recorder. High sensitivity. Put it in the kitchen. They're careless there." I stared at him. "Harold, what if they try again?" He gave a slow, grim smile. "Then you won't fall. Because now you know where they step." When I walked back into the house, Marcia was sitting at the counter eating yogurt straight from the container. She lifted her eyes and scanned me with disdain. "Back already? I thought you'd be gone longer. You walk slower every day." I forced my voice into something shaky, uncertain. I got a little confused on the way home." Her face lit up, not with concern, but satisfaction. "See, Evan?" she called out. "I told you. She's slipping. Won't be long now." Evan walked in, rubbing the back of his neck, pretending to look worried but sounding bored. "Mom, you need to rest. Don't strain yourself." Their softness was worse than their cruelty, because it was fake. And it confirmed exactly what Harold had predicted. The weaker they believed I was, the bolder they became. While pretending to reach for a glass, I slipped the recorder under the edge of the spice rack. They didn't notice. They didn't notice anything about me unless it inconvenienced them. As I turned to leave the kitchen, their voices sharpened behind me. Marcia hissed, "She's useless, can't even walk without wobbling." Evan muttered, "Dad lasted until 69. Why is she still here?" Marcia snorted, "Some people refuse to die just to make others miserable." A pause. Then the words that froze my blood. "Maybe we should make sure the next fall finishes the job." Evan did not disagree. He simply said, "We'll pick a better morning." My hands trembled, but not from fear, from fury. I retreated to my room and shut the door, pulling in a long, unsteady breath. I now had everything Harold needed: their voices, their intentions, their timeline. For the first time in months, I felt something warm fill my chest. Not hope, not relief, resolve. They wanted me gone, but I was finally ready to fight. 3 days after I hid the recorder in the kitchen, their whispers began to slip through the vents with the ease of wind moving through thin walls, and every syllable carried the cold weight of finality. I remember standing near the staircase, pretending to wipe dust from the railing, when Marcia called Evan into the dining room with a voice so sugary that I immediately knew something venomous was waiting beneath it. As I stepped quietly into the hallway, their conversation unfolded with the precision of two criminals who had practiced their lines more than once. Marcia, with her tone sharp as cracked glass, declared that everything would be finished this weekend, and Evan, sounding exhausted but disturbingly resigned, muttered that all he wanted was for me to finally disappear, as if I were a stain on the floor rather than the woman who brought him into this world. When Marcia replied that Dr. Fowler had already been paid and that no coroner would question a 75-year-old woman tumbling down the stairs, their champagne glasses clinked with a casualness that nauseated me, as though they were congratulating themselves for solving a minor household problem. I did not gasp, did not choke, did not flinch. I simply absorbed their words, the way one might absorb bitter medicine, slowly, painfully, yet with the awareness that this truth, no matter how cruel, would save my life. The recorder captured every sentence, but my memory captured something even more important: the absolute certainty that they believed the law, fate, and morality itself would bend to their convenience. That same evening, the phone call that would tighten every loose thread came from Diego, who had gone deeper into the corrupted files than I had thought possible. Standing on the porch where the cold wind wrapped around me like a shroud, I listened as he explained that the broken phone contained much more than the staircase recordings. He told me that another camera existed, one hidden in the lamp beside my bed, angled directly at the place where I slept, waiting to capture the moment they hoped I would stop breathing. What froze my blood was not the camera itself, but the purpose behind it, because Diego's voice, trembling with anger and disbelief, revealed that they had created two separate plans for my death, one involving the stairs, and another relying on my heart, giving out during the night so they could claim innocence with rehearsed grief and carefully edited footage. By the time Diego finished explaining the depth of their deception, my fear had evaporated completely, replaced by a cold determination that bloomed in my chest like winter ice forming on still water. I told him to send everything to Harold, and Harold's response came almost immediately, urging me not to confront them, not to flee, but to let them continue revealing themselves, because the law could only strike once all their cards were on the table. But that same evening, a knock at the door shattered their illusion of control. Harold Benton stepped inside with the calm authority of a man who had spent a lifetime dragging truth into the light. He asked to speak with me, and when Evan attempted to block him like a child guarding stolen candy, Harold dismissed him with a single cold stare before sitting me down in the living room. One by one, he laid out every piece of evidence: hidden cameras, recorded conversations, payment emails, staircase footage, and with each revelation, the mask Marcia wore cracked a little more, until her face twisted into the very expression of hatred she had tried so desperately to hide from outsiders. The police arrived minutes later. The chaos that followed Marcia screaming, Evan choking on tears he had never shed for me, the officers reading their charges in calm, practiced tones blurred at the edges, but one moment remained sharp and unforgettable: the moment the door closed behind them, leaving the house so quiet that I could finally hear something I had forgotten existed. My own breathing, steady, alive, in my own home. When Harold placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder and told me I was safe, I walked to the staircase, touched the railing they had chosen for my death, and whispered to myself, in a voice that no longer trembled, that I was alive not because fate favored me, but because I refused to die on their terms. I used to believe that justice was something delicate and fragile, a thing that sometimes reached the innocent too late and punished the guilty too softly. But as I sat in that quiet courtroom watching Marcia Whitcomb stand in front of the judge, her once flawless confidence reduced to trembling denial, I learned something new. Justice may arrive slowly, but when it finally comes, it lands with a weight no guilty person can outrun. The judge read her charges in a voice so steady and calm that it sounded almost merciful: attempted murder, elder abuse, insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit bodily harm, and each count struck the air like a hammer, breaking apart the last pieces of the life she had tried to build on my bones. When the prosecutor played the footage of the staircase, Marcia, spreading soap with a smile that could curdle milk, the entire courtroom shifted. Even Evan could not meet her eyes. For the first time, Marcia realized that charm could not outshine evidence. When the sentence was handed down, 25 to 30 years in a state correctional facility, Marcia did not scream or faint or beg. She simply stared at the floor, as if the ground beneath her had opened and swallowed every lie she had ever relied on. I watched her shoulders collapse inward, and instead of pity, all I felt was the long overdue release of knowing that harm, once exposed, cannot hide behind charm forever. But justice did not stop with her. Evan, my son, the boy I once carried on my hip through thunderstorms and fevers, faced his own reckoning, though his punishment was woven from quieter threads. He did not receive Marcia's sentence, no, but the scandal stripped him bare in ways he never expected. His employer terminated him within 48 hours of the investigation going public, not because they feared danger, but because they could not afford to keep a man whose name had appeared in headlines describing the attempted killing of his own mother. The house, my house, was legally mine, and once the court recognized the forged financial documents Marcia had pushed him into signing, every claim he thought he had vanished like steam rising from cold pavement. When Marcia realized her life was collapsing faster than she could grasp, she offered a full statement to prosecutors. Miles of venom poured into every page, describing Evan's involvement in chilling detail. Though he had not planned the crime as meticulously as she had, he had stood by, participated, encouraged, and profited from it, and the law saw him exactly as he was, not an architect, but an accomplice. Evan received 3 years in a state rehabilitation program for vulnerable adult abuse and fraud. And when the bailiff led him out of the courtroom, he looked at me the way a drowning man looks at the shore, close enough to see, too far to ever reach again. For the first time, I did not reach back, because mercy is not the same as self-destruction, and I had finally learned the difference. Dr. Leonard Fowler's downfall was quieter but perhaps even more devastating. His medical license was permanently revoked, stripped from him with the same swift, unceremonious efficiency he had once tried to apply to my life. The state board launched a separate investigation into his history, and within a week, 2 additional families came forward, describing suspicious complications and questionable payments they had been encouraged to make. Fowler, who had once walked hospital halls with pride, now faced the possibility of criminal charges that could put him behind bars beside the very woman who had bribed him. I did not feel sorrow for him either, because a man who sells the lives of the vulnerable for envelopes of cash is not a healer. He is a predator, wearing a white coat. What surprised me most during those difficult weeks was the unexpected warmth that grew from the most unlikely person, my neighbor, Avery Cross. Avery, who had lent me her porch light when mine flickered, who had set out a chair for me during spring barbecues, even when Evan and Marcia pretended not to see, appeared at my door almost every afternoon after the arrests. She brought soup one day, a bouquet of flowers the next, and on a quiet Thursday morning she simply sat beside me on the living room couch, resting her hand gently on mine as if she understood that silence can sometimes be the most generous form of comfort. She told me that family was not always made by blood, that sometimes kindness chose its own lineage, and that she wanted me to know she would not let me go through the aftermath alone. Her sincerity wrapped itself around my heart with a gentleness I had forgotten people were capable of. In her presence, I felt something I had not felt in years, not safety, not relief, but belonging. And in the soft light of those quiet afternoons, I realized something powerful. The world had tried to bury me, but life, stubborn and determined, had given me someone who chose me freely, without obligation, without resentment, without the weight of shared history. It is astonishing how healing a single kind person can be. In the weeks that followed the trials and the sentencing, I found myself sitting in my quiet living room, my own living room, no longer clouded by footsteps, insults, or the heavy, suffocating dread that had become the air of that house, and I realized that survival was no longer enough for me. I wanted closure, not the kind coated in bitterness, but the kind carved from clarity and self-respect. That was when I made the decision to rewrite my will, not out of spite, but out of a need to restore the balance that had been broken long before the first insult had ever left Marcia's lips. For the first time in my life, I sat with a pen, steady in my hand rather than trembling in fear, and I wrote my wishes with the kind of calm certainty that only comes when a woman has finally reclaimed her voice. A large portion of my estate, including the house I had fought to keep and the savings I had spent a lifetime building, I set aside for Avery Cross, the neighbor who had become the unexpected anchor of my storm. She had offered me comfort without being asked, had defended me without being prompted, and had stood beside me not because blood tied us, but because compassion did. Leaving her that inheritance felt like planting something good in soil that had once been poisoned. Another portion I assigned to Diego Mercer, the young technician whose quiet courage cracked open the truth that would have otherwise continued festering in the dark. I remembered the way his hands shook when he whispered, "Ma'am, you need to see this," and how his sense of responsibility outweighed any fear he had of involving himself. People often underestimate the weight of small heroes, those who step forward when silence would be easier, but Diego had changed the course of my life with nothing more than integrity and a trembling voice. And then, with a long exhale that carried years of exhaustion out of my body, I dedicated the final portion of my estate to a fund supporting abused and neglected children. I wanted my story, my pain, my mistakes, my survival, to help children whose homes were battlegrounds long before they understood what love was supposed to look like. I wanted to break the cycle in the only way I could. I wanted to give what I never received when I needed it most, protection before the damage became permanent. At the bottom of the will, in clean, deliberate handwriting, I wrote a single sentence that felt like sealing a wound. Evan Whitcomb shall receive nothing from my estate. Not out of revenge, but out of truth. A man who stands silently as harm is done is a participant in that harm, and blood alone cannot wash away complicity. I signed the final page without tears, without shaking, without a single shred of guilt. Freedom can be written in ink just as surely as in courage. When Harold Benton, my attorney and the boy I once carried through a doorway after a dog attacked him decades ago, placed the final documents into a neat folder, he looked at me with an expression soft enough to shift something inside my chest. "You did the right thing," he said, sitting across from me with hands folded as if delivering both reassurance and respect. "You did not lose a son, Lorraine. You freed yourself from a man who stopped being one a long time ago." His words were not sharp, but they sliced through the last thread of pain still holding me. I nodded, not with victory, but with acceptance. A month later, when the chaos settled and the reporters stopped calling and the courthouse returned to its usual rhythm, I left the old house behind. The walls remembered too many cruel echoes, and even though the deed was legally mine, the air still felt haunted by the ghosts of voices that had prayed for my death. I moved into a small cottage on the east side of town, a cozy white house with blue shutters, just big enough for one person and a lifetime of peace. Life there unfolded gently. Avery visited every few days, always carrying something thoughtful: banana bread warm from her oven, a bag of library books she thought I might enjoy, or sometimes nothing but her laughter and the soft shuffle of her slippers as she walked in without knocking. She tended the garden with me, helped me hang curtains, and sat beside me on the porch swing as the sun slipped behind the trees. She would talk about her day while I listened, grateful for the sound of a friendly voice that didn't slice or belittle or demand. For the first time in many years, I felt what it meant to be part of someone's life simply because they wanted me there. Sometimes Diego dropped by too, usually after his shift, still smelling faintly of solder and machine oil. He always apologized for intruding even though I told him he never needed to, and he brought me little gadgets he thought might help: an easier phone, a safer fall alert bracelet, a digital lock he insisted on installing so I would feel protected. I saw in him the kind of young man my son could have been, if love had grown properly instead of being poisoned by resentment and manipulation. In that cottage, with the soft hum of wind brushing against the windows and the steady presence of people who cared without obligation, I began to sleep soundly again. And each morning, when I opened my eyes, I felt the profound sweetness of being alive, not barely alive, not tolerated, not endured, but fully, quietly, peacefully alive. On the last afternoon of autumn, as the leaves outside turned the color of rusted gold, I sat on my porch alone and allowed myself to speak the words that had lived inside me since the day everything changed. My voice was steady, almost serene, as I whispered into the cool air. They thought pushing me down the stairs would set them free, but I stood back up, and they are the ones who fell into the very pit they dug. And with that, my story found its ending not in tragedy, not in defeat, but in strength reclaimed, peace rediscovered, and a life rebuilt on the foundation of people who chose to stay, rather than those who wished me gone. When I sit on my porch now, letting the breeze settle over my shoulders and the quiet of my new life sink into my bones, I often wonder how close I came to disappearing without anyone ever knowing the truth. But the truth did come out, and I am still here, still breathing, still telling my story. And if there is anything I have learned, it is this: you can survive cruelty, you can outlive betrayal, you can rebuild a life even after the people you loved tried to break it. But you never have to suffer in silence. So, if my story reached you today, if it made your heart ache, or made you angry, or made you believe that justice can still find its way through the cracks, then I hope you stay with us. There are so many voices like mine, so many stories still waiting to be heard. Please subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Your support keeps these stories alive, keeps the truth loud, and keeps every grandmother, every survivor, every quiet fighter from ever feeling alone again. Thank you, truly, for listening. And wherever you are, I hope you choose peace, because I finally found mine.